The night was quiet, but there was an eerie stillness in the air, as if the world was holding its breath. Jack Mason stood on his front porch, sipping a beer and staring up at the sky. It was a routine he'd fallen into over the years. After a long day at the construction site, he liked to unwind under the stars, imagining distant worlds out there. But tonight felt different. The air was too still, the night too quiet. He squinted, noticing something odd in the sky, a flicker of movement, barely perceptible, like a distortion in the stars themselves. He blinked, thinking his eyes were playing tricks on him, but the shimmering spot remained. It seemed to pulse for a moment, then vanish altogether. "Must be tired," Jack muttered to himself, taking another swig of his beer. Before he could turn to go back inside, a low hum filled the air. It was so faint at first that Jack thought it might be the wind, but it grew louder, vibrating through his bones. He froze, eyes scanning the sky. There was nothing to see, yet the sound intensified, as if it was all around him, enveloping him. Suddenly, a blinding light shot down from the sky, wrapping Jack in a harsh white glow. His body seized up, and his beer slipped from his hand, shattering on the porch. He tried to move, to scream, but his body was locked in place. His vision blurred, and in the split second before everything went dark, he felt himself rising into the air. Jack awoke with a jolt, his body weightless, floating in an unfamiliar space. Panic surged through him, and he thrashed wildly, only to find himself restrained by invisible forces. His arms, legs, and torso were held in place by some unseen grip. His breath quickened as he realized he wasn't on Earth anymore. The room, or whatever it was dimly lit by faint, pulsating lights embedded in the smooth, metallic walls. The air felt unnaturally still, and the hum he'd heard before echoed softly, vibrating through the floor and into his body. "What the hell?" Jack whispered, his voice trembling. A hiss broke the silence, and a panel on the wall slid open. Two figures emerged, their silhouettes barely visible in the dim light. They were tall and impossibly slender, their limbs longer than any human's, with smoother, featureless skin that reflected the light in a metallic sheen. Their heads were elongated, with large, pitch-black eyes that seemed to absorb all light around them. Aliens. Jack's mind raced. He'd never believed in UFOs or alien abductions. Those were things for conspiracy theorists and late-night TV shows. But here he was, restrained in some sort of alien ship, surrounded by creatures that looked like they had stepped out of a nightmare. One of the beings approached him, its movements smooth and unnervingly silent. A thin arm extended toward Jack, and he flinched as the creature placed its hand, or what passed for a hand, against his chest. His heart pounded beneath its touch, and he could feel warmth radiating from the contact. Suddenly a voice filled the room, though the alien's mouth didn't move. The sound was inside Jack's head, cold and emotionless. Subject identified human. Species Homo sapiens. Male. Age 35 Earth years. Condition physically sound. Jack's panic turned to dread. "They're studying me." He struggled against his restraints, but it was useless. The alien's hand remained on his chest, and he could feel something probing deeper, as if it was reaching inside him without ever breaking the skin. Analysis in progress. Psychological evaluation to follow. Prepare for data extraction. "No! What the hell are you doing?" Jack shouted, his voice cracking with fear. "Let me go! You can't just—" But the words died in his throat as a sharp pain shot through his body. It was like nothing he had ever experienced. An electric jolt that coursed through every nerve, burning him from the inside out. His muscles convulsed, his vision darkening as he fought to stay conscious. The pain stopped as suddenly as it began. Jack gasped for air, his body trembling. His mind was foggy, disoriented, and he struggled to understand what was happening. The two aliens were watching him intently, their black eyes unblinking. Initial scan complete. Subject is viable for further study. The second alien stepped forward, carrying a small device that hummed softly in its hand. It resembled a metallic orb, smooth and seamless, with tiny, intricate patterns etched into its surface. The alien pressed the orb to Jack's forehead, and instantly his mind was flooded with images and sounds, memories of his childhood, his family, his life on Earth. They were pulling everything from him, extracting his very essence. Emotional responses detected. Subject demonstrates strong familial bonds and survival instincts. Psychological data indicates resilience and adaptability. As Jack's memories were siphoned, A sense of dread settled over him. He wasn't just being studied, they were learning how humans thought, how they felt, how they lived. His mind flashed with the realization of what this meant. Shh, they're planning something. The aliens were silent as they worked, but Jack could feel their intent. They weren't just curious observers. They were preparing for something bigger than just one abduction. He wasn't the first, and he wouldn't be the last. As the device finally withdrew, Jack's mind felt numb. His thoughts scrambled. The alien turned to the other, and their telepathic exchange filled the room once again. Subject's data will aid in the infiltration of Earth's population, behavioral patterns identified, preparation for full-scale integration underway. Jack's eyes widened as the words sank in. Integration. They were planning to overtake Earth, using the knowledge they were extracting from him and others like him. Before he could process it, the room began to spin, and darkness closed in around him once more. The last thing Jack heard was the alien's cold voice echoing in his mind. Phase 1 complete. Initiate transfer to the observation unit. Jack awoke in darkness, his body aching and his mind groggy. The alien memories came rushing back in flashes, the abduction, the cold-eyed creatures and the invasive scans. Panic surged, but Jack fought it down, forcing himself to focus. He was still aboard the alien ship. His surroundings were dim, and the air was heavy with that same sterile, artificial smell. He tried to sit up, and to his surprise, there were no restraints this time. The aliens had left him unrestrained, which was odd. It took him a few moments to realize why. They don't think I'm a threat. Jack scanned the small metallic room. The smooth curved walls bore no doors or windows, and the only light came from faint glowing lines that pulsed rhythmically across the ceiling. He quickly pieced it together. These creatures didn't expect resistance. To them, humans were weak, inferior, too primitive to escape their technology. Good, Jack thought. Let them underestimate me. He stood slowly, wincing as his muscles protested. His head pounded, still foggy from whatever drugs or tech they had used to examine him, but his instincts kicked in. The first step was finding a way out. He had to keep his mind sharp and stay calm. The faint hum of the ship's systems was the only sound as Jack approached one of the walls, running his hands along the smooth surface. He had no idea how the doors worked, but after his brief encounter with the alien's drone, he knew they used technology far beyond Earth's. Suddenly, a low hiss sounded, and a section of the wall slid open. A small, hovering drone similar to the one before drifted into the room. This time, Jack didn't hesitate. He grabbed a nearby metal shard from the corner, likely a leftover part from some equipment, and lunged at the drone. In one swift motion, he jammed the shard into its control unit. The drone buzzed in protest, sparks flying as it crashed to the floor. Jack didn't wait to see if it was fully disabled. He bent over the remains and started salvaging parts. The circuitry was advanced, but some things were universal: wires, energy cells, and basic logic boards. After a few minutes of tinkering, Jack had created a crude jammer, a device that would interfere with the ship's internal systems. He had no idea how long it would last or how powerful it would be, but it was better than nothing. When he activated the jammer, the ship's hum changed. The walls vibrated slightly, and the lights dimmed for a moment. Jack grinned. The ship was reacting to the disruption. As Jack stepped into the corridor, he braced for alarms, guards, or some form of security response. But there was nothing. The corridor was eerily empty, with no signs of patrols or surveillance. The aliens had made a critical mistake. They didn't think any human could escape, so they hadn't bothered to lock him down tightly. He moved quickly but cautiously, his ears straining for any sound of movement. The faint flicker of lights overhead suggested his jammer was doing its job, keeping the ship's systems from fully functioning. It became clear to Jack that security was minimal, if there was any at all. The ship wasn't designed to contain hostile or dangerous beings. To these creatures, humans were nothing more than study subjects, animals in a cage. Why would they need guards or alarms for something as insignificant as a human? Jack grinned to himself, the fear slowly fading into determination. They think we're weak. They have no idea. As Jack navigated the maze-like corridors, he began to piece together more of the ship's layout. He passed chambers where strange equipment pulsed and flickered, and other rooms with glass pods, likely where they were keeping other abducted humans. But there was no time to free anyone else. He had one mission: escape, and if possible, take this ship down with him. He eventually found his way to a large control chamber. From the small observation window, he could see the heart of the ship's command center. The room was circular, with glowing consoles that projected holographic displays of star systems and ship diagnostics. The tall, slender aliens moved about in eerie synchronization, their dark eyes locked on their tasks. And in the center of the room was what Jack was looking for: the ship's power core. It was a large, pulsating sphere of blue light, suspended in the air by complex energy conduits. One glance told Jack everything he needed to know. It was volatile, and if he could tamper with it, he'd have a shot at crippling the ship. Once again, he encountered no guards. The aliens were so confident in their technological superiority that they hadn't stationed any defenses inside their own ship. Jack figured they probably never expected an escape attempt, especially not from someone as inferior as him. He slipped into the room through an unguarded service panel, keeping low as he made his way toward the power core. The aliens didn't notice him at first, too absorbed in their tasks. Jack moved quickly, grabbing the remaining parts from his makeshift jammer and a few spare tools he'd scavenged along the way. He needed to rig an explosive, a small device that would destabilize the core. Just as he finished attaching the crude detonator to the base of the power core, one of the aliens turned. Its eyes locked onto Jack, and a high-pitched telepathic signal echoed in his head. Intruder detected. Human presence unauthorized. Jack bolted, knowing he only had minutes before the core would explode. The alien shouted something telepathically to the others, but they were too slow. Jack sprinted down the corridor, the ship's alarms finally blaring to life. He glanced back to see the aliens trying to chase him, their long, slender limbs moving faster than any human could, but the ship itself was already destabilizing. The lights flickered wildly, and the walls shook as the core began its meltdown. He reached the escape pod bay, slamming his fist against the controls. The door hissed open, and Jack jumped into the nearest pod, hitting the launch button just as the entire ship groaned with the force of the imminent explosion. The escape pod shot into the vacuum of space, and Jack watched through the viewport as the alien ship erupted in a brilliant explosion, debris scattering in all directions. The shockwave rattled the pod, but Jack held on, feeling a surge of triumph. He had done it. He had outwitted the aliens, escaped their ship, and destroyed it in the process. Far off in the void of space, another alien vessel monitored the destruction. Inside, the telepathic communication among the alien commanders was filled with shock and uncertainty. A single human has destroyed one of our vessels? They are more resourceful than anticipated. Their resilience makes them dangerous. There was a long, silent pause. The aliens who had thought humanity was nothing more than an easily subjugated species now faced a difficult decision. Abort the Earth invasion. We will not risk further losses. They are unpredictable. As the alien vessel disappeared into the stars, their plans to conquer Earth were abandoned. Jack Mason had not only escaped with his life, but had unknowingly saved humanity from an invasion. As his escape pod drifted back toward Earth, Jack leaned back, staring out at the stars. He had beaten the odds, and for the first time he felt the power of being underestimated.